Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. And now, here are Bob and Richard.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. I'm Bob Dancer.
And I'm Richard Munchkin.
Our guest today is best-selling writer Maria Konnikova. With a PhD in psychology, one of her books is called Mastermind, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes. She wanted to write about poker, so she decided to go to poker legend Eric Seidel to ask for some help. What happened next is what today's show is all about. Maria Konnikova, welcome to Gambling with an Edge.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
I'd like to really start with, how did you get connected to Eric Seidel? How did that process happen?
Yeah, that process really grew out of my background as a journalist. So over my career, which has been at this point, almost 13 years long, which makes me very, very old.
In journalism years.
Yes, in journalism years, I'm ancient. I have had to cold call, reach out to all sorts of people, a lot of them incredibly high profile. I hate doing it. I do not start hating it any less over time, but I've gotten kind of more used to it, more comfortable doing it, as one needs to. And so I did a lot of research, to try to figure out, who in the world am I going to reach out to, because I really knew nothing about the world of poker. And Eric Seidel really jumped out at me because no one's had the kind of longevity that he's had. I mean, he's been crushing at the highest limits just for 30 years, and it's incredible. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, this might be an interesting person. I did some research into him. He seemed like a nice guy, and so I reached out to him in the most official way possible on Twitter. So I connected to him on Twitter and sent him a message and was like, hey, I'm a writer for The New Yorker. I'm working on a new project. I'd really love to talk to you about it. And I got very lucky. It happened that he was in New York at the time, so we were able to meet in person. And I pitched him, and I said, hey, this is what I'm doing, and I would really love to work with you. I'd love for you to be my coach and my mentor throughout this journey. And I got lucky a very second time because Eric is an exceptional person who is not only incredibly nice, but also has very diverse interests that aren't necessarily typical of a lot of poker players. So, he's a subscriber to The New Yorker. He loves culture. He loves non-traditional approaches to things. So he was very excited and thought that this was potentially a great idea and said, let's try it out. I can't promise anything. You might suck at poker. We might not get along. There are lots of things that can go wrong, but let's give it a shot. So we gave it a shot, and it ended up working out.
That's great. And you had much better success than I. I tried several times to get him for the show, but through the official Twitter channels. But
well, now
right.
we have the Maria channel.
I've never asked him to record anything. And the one time I asked him to do a podcast, he said no. So you're not the only one.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, at the start,
go ahead.
At the start, how did you and Eric imagine this project unfolding?
I don't think either one of us really knew. I didn't know because I knew nothing about poker, so I wasn't really sure what the process was going to be like. I did know something about learning. I'm someone who, as someone who's written about a wide variety of topics, I've immersed myself in a lot of different worlds and a lot of different areas of expertise where, I've followed experts in fields that I knew nothing about. So I was pretty confident that I'd be able to kind of pick some stuff up that I knew how to learn, that at least I had that part down. But I didn't know what learning in poker entailed. I didn't know anything about the game at all. I had no idea what to expect. And I think for Eric, he's never taken a student before. And, this isn't something that he ever thought he was going to do. So I don't think he really knew how it was going to work either. So for both of us, it was kind of this deep dive into a pretty uncertain terrain, which, as I've learned since, is not a bad way of preparing for playing poker, because you have to be incredibly comfortable diving into uncertain terrain if you're going to be good at poker.
So did you envision this as kind of a George Plimpton book where you were going to become a poker player and then write about your experience of that?
Yes. So that was kind of the intention, and the kind of the other thing that I do want to say was that it was never intended to be a poker book. This was never going to be, this is how to play poker. This is strategy. These are the secrets of Eric Seidel. It's more of a journey and more using poker as kind of a metaphor for life and to explore a lot of different themes in life. Not necessarily something you would think about when you think, traditional poker book.
And how much time did you originally think you would spend playing poker? And was it I'm going to get these lessons from him and then enter tournaments or cash games? Or what was the original plan?
So early on, we decided that I was going to focus exclusively on tournaments and exclusively on No Limit Hold'em. And we decided this mostly because I was going to kind of try to get as good as I possibly could in a very limited amount of time, specifically a year. And so it was something where Eric said, cash games are good and useful. Different types of poker are good and useful, but if you want to really excel, let's focus and let's really just devote all of your resources to this particular thing, because cash games have different strategy from tournaments, and PLO has different strategies from No Limit Hold'em, and so originally I was just going to be doing tournaments, just doing No Limit, and doing this for a year, not a year of playing. Originally it was going to be kind of a year of study plus play. From the moment that I met Eric, and it ended up expanding a little bit beyond that.
And I mean, if I were going to try to teach someone something, I would expect them to realize that it was going to be a full-time job. I mean, were you focusing on this like 30, 40 hours a week?
Yeah, so I actually decided from the onset that I was going to treat this as a full-time job. So right away, I spoke to my editors at the New Yorker and said, I'm going to do this book. It's going to be an immersive, I'm going to give it my all type of project. So I need to go on leave. And they said, sure. So they're quite flexible about that. They said, go on book leave and come back whenever you're ready to come back. And so I knew right away that I didn't want to half-ass it, so to speak. I wanted to really give it my all. So this was always meant to be a full-time project. I did not have any delusions about, let me just dabble in this. If I do something, I really want to do it right. And I thought it was really important for the book for me to really just dive in completely.
And at that point, did you move out to Las Vegas?
No, I did not. So Eric actually splits his time between New York and Las Vegas. And so he does half the year here. And I asked kind of what was possible, and he said, if you're actually playing tournaments, then you don't need to live in Las Vegas because you can travel to kind of a lot of the stops. We decided to kind of put together a schedule for me. But at the beginning, part of it was taking these extended trips to Las Vegas for a few weeks at a time, where I could really immerse myself in that world and learn to play from the bottom up, starting from the lowest stakes tournaments that happen on a daily basis in Las Vegas.
And he allowed you, and I guess the Aria poker room allowed you to sweat his play, right? And so you were able to sit behind him and see his cards while he played in a tournament, or how did that work?
Yeah, so this was actually pretty incredible. I didn't realize just how rare and just unprecedented it was. And, thank God for Aria and for the fact that their tournament directors are so incredible. But they have these high roller tournaments, 25K, 50K, 100K tournaments that they run on a regular basis. And Eric plays in them, and he said, a great way for you to learn would be to actually watch. And so I came And I spoke to Paul Campbell, who's the tournament director at Aria, and said, this is my story, kind of, can I sit behind Eric? And he said, we have no problem with it because these are pretty small tournaments. They get 20, 30 players. And he said, we don't have a problem with it as long as the players don't have a problem with it. And now, thank God for the high roller players who are really just great, awesome, generous guys. I went and I had to ask every single one of them to give me permission to sit behind Eric, and every single one of them said yes. And it had to be anonymous, because if even one person felt uncomfortable, then I couldn't do it, because this is not a cash game. This is a tournament. It's for a lot of money. It's really weird and unusual to have a person sitting behind you, sweating someone's cards. So they all said yes. They all embraced the project, embraced me. They were all eager to help. And it was one of these just phenomenal experiences where pretty soon, I was talking to all of them, and, Jason Kuhn would say, hey, you want to sweat with me for a little while? So I would, I'd move from Eric's seat and sit behind Jason. And it was pretty incredible to have that experience. And I think it put my learning on a trajectory that would really be impossible without this access. And I fully realize how insanely lucky I am that, this is an opportunity that so many people would kill for. And I've tried to do them proud and do everything I can to, to live up to their hopes and expectations for me.
Yeah, that really was an amazing set of circumstances. Now, at the beginning, did Eric say to you, okay, start by reading these books, or did you just dive right in?
He did say exactly that. So, what people have asked, did Eric teach you the basics of poker strategy? And the answer is absolutely not. He was like, what, the basics, you're on your own. Just go and do this. So he had me read, Harrington on Hold'em. He had me read, he had started with Sklansky. He's like, go read the classics, read Sklansky, read Super System. But, Dan Harrington is a kind of a little bit more of a modern approach than we. Like, all right, read some Gus Hansen, Every Hand Revealed, see how you can do kind of a very different type of approach to poker. So he did give me a little reading list, which became more advanced as we went on, but that was kind of at the beginning how I learned some of the basics.
Had you played any poker at all prior to that?
Zero. I had played 0 hands of poker. I hadn't played any card games at all. I did not know how many cards were in a card deck.
Wow. So, I mean, the other thing I would say right away is just go start playing in the cheapest tournaments you can find, just so you get some time at the table to see how it all works.
For sure. So at first, I was in New York and I was reading these books. And it's actually really great that New Jersey is right across the river and online poker is legal in New Jersey. So one of the first things Eric said is go play on PokerStars. It's legal in New Jersey. You can find some low stakes games where it's no pressure because it's online. No one sees you, no one knows you, and you'll start getting hands in. You'll start actually getting a feel for some of the theory that you're reading about, getting a feel for how kind of some of these things feel like. And one of the first things that kind of we did when we actually started studying together. So first when I read, I would actually write down, questions that I had or spots in the books that were confusing, and we'd talk about them. But then when I started going to New Jersey, I started going a few days a week, and we would go through, some of my hand histories. We'd actually kind of go through a hand history for PokerStars and say, okay, how did I play? It was definitely a very, very humbling process because, I was playing abysmally. People would be like, what are you doing here? How did you get into this spot? What are you thinking? But it was actually incredibly helpful because it's not like he was saying you're horrible. He was saying, how did you get here? What were you thinking? Why did you make this decision? What's your thought process? And so it actually forced me to realize, oh, you can't just do things. You have to always have an incredibly good reason why you're doing that thing. And then I'm going to have to explain that reason to Eric Seidel. So I better think about it ahead of time before just doing something. and be like, oh, these seem like good cards. Like maybe I should raise a little here. And so that was the beginning. And then I went out to Vegas to start playing my first live games. But before that, I definitely had some online hands in my arsenal.
Okay, so you went to Las Vegas and played low-limit tournaments.
Yep.
How was that different than online, and was it a pleasant experience for you?
So it was incredibly different from online because all of a sudden you have all of this information. And, these were things that we talked about, things I thought about beforehand, but, I really didn't know what to expect. And I had, my initial experience of Las Vegas was seeing these high roller tournaments at the Aria. And then when I went back to play myself, Eric made me play at places like the Golden Nugget, Planet Hollywood. So places that had much lower stakes, and he wouldn't let me play at Aria because the tournaments were too expensive for me. Those daily tournaments started at $125, and he said, you don't have the bankroll for that. You don't have the experience for that. You have to earn your way there. You can't play tournaments that are higher than, $40, $50 buy-ins right now. And so it was very much a different experience, actually, seeing what a poker room at the Golden Nugget was like as opposed to a poker room at the Aria. And it was really interesting and fun. And right away I could see that my edge was always going to be in live poker, which is kind of what I suspected, rather than online poker, because my background in psychology, my background as a writer, has enabled me to, I think, observe a lot more closely than many people are used to doing. And that right away gave me some insights live that I couldn't get online. And right away I realized, I love live poker. That's kind of, online is wonderful for getting hand volume in, but this is what I like. This is what I want to be doing. As to whether it was pleasant, I think I'd be lying to say that it was a very pleasant experience overall, playing somewhere like the Nugget, just because I was a girl. I was the only girl, usually at these events. And the players at those stakes are not necessarily the nicest players. A lot of them are drinking. A lot of them, are kind of smoking in between hands. And a lot of them don't really think that, women have much business being at a poker table. So I got into definitely some awkward situations very early on, something that I'm happy to say becomes less and less frequent as you move up in stakes.
Hey, at those lower stakes, you often run into like angle shooters, right?
Oh, for sure. I definitely saw my share of angle shooters. Cool. I mean, they're fascinating material for books, right? You see them and you're like, oh my God, I've read about people like you and you actually exist. I can't believe that. But yeah, they're not very pleasant to play with.
What kind of angle shooting?
Oh, go ahead.
All sorts of different ones from. You definitely see all sorts of angle shooters. I saw ones who just wanted you to kind of reveal the strength of your hand by like pretending to call and then not actually calling. I had ones who pretended they didn't know how to play poker. It really ran the gamut. Basically, if you've read about it, it exists somewhere in Las Vegas.
I played with a guy at the Wynn one time who, it was a table full of tourists. And so this guy, there's a tourist who is going to make a call, and the guy just announces flush. And then says to the tourist, oh, I didn't see you hadn't called yet. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I announced I have a flush, So the tourist throws his hand away, and then the guy proudly throws his cards over, and it had been a bluff. And it's something that seemed obvious to me, but, the tourist fell for it hook, line, and sinker. But I just thought, what a scumbag. But I want to go back to this this point of you're being the only woman at the table. When you were watching those high roller tournaments at the Aria, were there any women in those? And did you ever get to talk to people like Jennifer Harmon or any of the other top women players?
Yeah, so at those tournaments, there really weren't any women. I think one time Lauren Roberts was playing, and that's the only time I saw a woman. Normally, it was just all the guys. I've actually never met Jennifer Harmon. I've heard wonderful things about her, but have never had a chance to interact with her. I did get to meet pretty early on Vanessa Seltz, who's now retired, but who is a fellow Brooklynite and actually lives quite close to me, and we became very friendly, and she was incredibly helpful to me starting out, and was always happy to talk through hands and give me a perspective that was very different from Eric's. And then over the last year, traveling the circuit, I've met some other incredible women. I mean, Liv Marie is great, and I see her at stops all the time, and she's been very helpful. Another Poker Stars player, Selena Lynn, is really wonderful. And when I was out in Macau a few months ago, she and her fiance Randy were just the most hospitable people in the world and took me out and kind of showed me Macau. I think took me to dinner, most nights I was there. So, have been really friendly and welcoming in a number of ways, not just when it comes to talking about poker strategy. So I've been very lucky to have found some supportive women who've really kind of made the journey a lot easier. That said, there aren't that many of them. I recently met Kristen Bicknell. She's wonderful and was also super nice and lovely. We've become friendly, and you kind of gravitate and you figure out who the other people are because there aren't that many of you. And so you start kind of hanging out together. But, the reason I think that happens is because you can count on, a few hands, the number of women at any given tournament.
I want to point out, I just want to point out to our listeners, we may have kind of buried the lead a little bit here. You started winning enough money that you postponed the book and are now playing professionally. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. The book is still happening. I am still working on it. I'm, still very closely in contact with my editor. It's just been postponed. And my publisher, Penguin Press, has been super supportive about that because, no one could have anticipated that the story would have gone this way. But it's great. It just it took on a life of its own. I think I did better more quickly than anyone could have expected, least of all myself.
Now, there was an article about you in Poker News, which brought you to Richard's and my attention. Now, other than being on our podcast, how did that article change your life?
Well, that article, I think you're talking about Mo's article that came out about 3 weeks ago, something like that, when I was in Monte Carlo. And somehow it just captured the way that he wrote it. He did a wonderful job. It captured the public's attention. Deadspin ended up picking it up, and then it just went viral. And I ended up having a Twitter moment all over the world, which was kind of insane. I never in a million years thought I'd go viral on Twitter. But that was pretty insane to have people really relate to the story. And I've gotten so much feedback. People say, we can't wait till your book. This is really inspiring. Like, this has made me want to play poker. This is a story that makes me realize that maybe I can do this too. And that warms my heart because that's the goal. I've fallen in love with the game, and I really want people to see my story and to say, hey, maybe that's me. Because I do think that if you work really, really hard and really give it your all, that this is actually a place where anything is possible.
In talking about sort of blowing up and Twitter moments and women in poker, we had a guest 6 or 8 weeks ago, and I don't know if you heard about this story or not, but it was another one that sort of went viral. She was using the name Sia Leda, and this is a woman who claims that she has much better results in tournaments when she dresses as a man. and is writing a book about how to be a woman in poker, and it just seemed wrong to me that her rationale was that as a woman she got no respect, so people would constantly call her down. And I kept saying, well, but that should be a good thing if they're calling you calling you down.
Yeah.
Did you hear about this story?
I did, and it made me raise an eyebrow for sure, because that strikes me. It just makes no sense to me whatsoever. I think, being a woman in poker does put you in awkward situations, sure. You might get, you might get a little bit more crap from some players than you would if you were a man. You have to deal with some things that men don't have to deal with. I've been propositioned at the table. I doubt that many men have had that happen to them. But you get into these tremendous advantages if you know how to read the table dynamics, because you are a woman and everyone sees your gender, and it's one of the things they're judging you on. And so if you can figure out how the player who's playing against you views women, that gives you a huge edge, because they're not going to be playing optimally. They're going to be trying to exploit you. And the moment you figure out how they're exploiting you is the moment you start taking their chips. So if you realize that they are calling you down because they don't want to be bluffed by a woman, I've played against those guys, well, then you don't bluff them. And you just get maximum value from them when you have big hands. And you choose your spots strategically. You might run a bluff against someone who thinks that women can't bluff, and they'll fold when you try to triple barrel. I've played against people like that. Those are the spots where you bluff. So you're totally out of balance. Someone who's playing kind of a game theory optimal approach would say, oh my God, what are you doing? Like, you're never bluffing here, you're always bluffing here. But all of those GTO players would say, yeah, live poker is all about exploitation. Good job, you're adjusting well. And so that's exactly what you have to do. You just have to figure out which style works against which people. And so sometimes, I'm super aggressive and super nitty at the exact same table in the exact same tournament. It just depends which person is in the pot against me.
Now, poker, there are players who tend to take the psychological approach, and there's others who tend to take the mathematical approach. Now, you are someone with a PhD in psychology who studied game theory, which allows you to take either approach, I assume. Which approach do you find is most useful to you, or more useful to you?
I don't like looking at it as a dichotomy or as an either or. I realized early on that if you want to be successful at the higher levels, you have to use both, and you have to use both all the time, and you have to use the one to supplement the other. So, I never in a million years when I started playing poker thought, hey, I'm going to be, that person who buys a new computer so that I can run PO Solver. I was that person. I now run simulations on PO Solver so that I can figure out kind of what the game theoretically optimal approach is going to be in certain spots. That has helped me immensely in my game, because it helps me look at kind of different situations in a way I wouldn't otherwise. But you can't just do that, because what I was just talking about, with kind of optimizing your gender advantage, that's all psychology. That has nothing to do with game theory. And so I kind of use the one to fill in gaps in the other, depending on who I'm playing, where I'm playing, kind of what hands I'm playing. And I find that you actually really do need both. And the funny thing is, having the game theory background actually helps you, it frees you up to use more of the psychology, because sometimes, you don't have to think about certain spots, certain odds as much as you would otherwise, because it becomes a little bit more second nature. So now you understand kind of what the game theoretical approach is, and now you're free to deviate. It's one of those things in writing. You learn the rules of grammar. You learn how to structure an essay. I'm sure you all have nightmares about high school 5-paragraph essays. Well, you need to learn that in order to then be able to break all of those rules and write in your own style. I think the same is true of poker. So the game theory gives you the solid foundation, and then the psychology enables you to be more creative in different spots and in your approach.
All right, thank you. We're going to take a brief break for some commercial announcements, and we'll be right back. The South Point has more than 10,000 games returning more than 99%. This is more than anyone else has. The promotion in June is the $500,000 guaranteed Big Spin and Win. Every Thursday in June, 8:15 p.m., 25 winners will get to spin the wheel. Wheel amounts are $2,000 in free play, $5,000, $10,000, or $25,000 in cash. The average spin is a bit more than $3,900. If everything goes according to average, they will give out less than $400,000 over the 4 weeks. What this means is on the last week, they will keep calling 5 people at a time until they reach $500,000 or more. There will be a lot more people called on June 28th, but also a lot more people there trying to get it. I don't know if the odds will be any better or not. You may earn up to 1,600 entries per day, where you get 1 entry per video poker dollar in, or 4 entries for every slot dollar in. The promotion day is midnight to midnight, and you may earn tickets after 9 p.m. on Thursdays, beginning May 31st, in addition to earning them before the drawing on Thursdays. Tickets must be activated at any machine between 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. We are approximately 1 month away from the next video poker classes at the South Point, which will begin July 3rd. At videopoker.com is the best place to play lots of games. If you sign up for the gold membership, $8.95 a month or $79.95 a year, this allows you to get corrections on most of the game. The game of the week is Wheel Poker Deluxe. This is the game where you pay an extra 5 coins per game, meaning triple play costs 20 instead of 15, 5 play costs 30 instead of 25, 10 play costs 55 instead of 50. And the bonuses come on dealt, trips, full houses, and quads. Slightly different for Deuce's Wild variations. If you get one of these bonuses, you spin the wheel. Where the wheel spins, it lands on a drawing opportunity. Sometimes it's 100 play, 4 to a flush. Sometimes it's 10 play with a pair of aces. Sometimes it's triple play, 4 to a royal, etc. There is no skill involved in the hold for the bonus, and the bonus is earned on the draw, meaning that if you know the strategy to the base game, you know the strategy to the Wheel Poker Deluxe version, which adds a bit more EV with a bit more variance. All right, we're back talking to Maria Konnikova about an author learning poker and learning it rather well. Now, in the article we referred to earlier, that shows a picture of you wearing a Poker Stars patch on the top of your outfit, whether it was a sweater or dress, I don't know. Does that imply there's a continuing sponsorship relationship between you and Poker Stars?
Yeah, it does indeed. So Poker Stars embraced the project relatively early on. I was introduced to them, a little way into my project, and they took me on as an ambassador, and I've been working with them ever since, and they've been incredibly supportive throughout the journey. I think they have a very broad approach when it comes to the types of people they think are good ambassadors for the game. So they're not narrow-minded in the sense that, we only want kind of the top high roller players. They're willing to see the potential in having someone like me, who came into the game with very little background, as someone who represents their brand as well. So I'm very grateful to them for taking me on back when my results were basically non-existent, and I think I've done pretty well for them.
So the World Series of Poker is about to start, and I know you're coming out for that. How many events are you planning to play in?
It really will depend on how I do. It's one of those things that it's difficult to predict because obviously, you want to go deep in some events, which will preclude you from playing others. I'm not coming for the beginning of the series. I'm actually taking a little bit of time off because I haven't had, more than a week in New York in like the last year. So right now I'm taking a few weeks after Monte Carlo to just kind of regroup and, make sure that I'm prepared fully, not just strategically, but mentally and emotionally. So this is my recharge period. So I'm planning to come about a week and a half into the series in early June, and then I'll stay through till the end. And I'll play a relatively full schedule, but I'm also, like I said, I'm a big, big believer in making sure that every single part of your game is on point, and that includes not getting fatigued. So if at any point I feel like I'm being burnt out, I'll skip an event and I'll take a day off, and I'll make sure to reboot and to play my best the next one.
Do you play any satellites, or do you tend to play the bigger?
So I've tried a few satellites in the past, and I realized that I really hate satellites. It's a really different style of play, and not one that I particularly like. It's more turbo. There's a lot more variance. There are people who are satellite specialists who are just incredibly good at training up that strategy. And to be honest, I've just not wanted to devote my resources to figuring out the optimal strategy for playing in satellites. So I've tried a few, and I'm not a huge fan. So I'm more of just play the main event and take my edges there.
Now, according to Card Player Magazine, your tournament winnings are just short of $200,000 now, which is a very impressive.
Over 200,000.
It is, okay. Well,
yeah.
Apparently they're not up to date, or one of your math is wrong, and that doesn't include entry fees or other expenses. Do you and Eric believe your skills are good enough for you to make it as a full-time tournament player?
We'll see. That's what we're figuring out in 2018. So this year, 100% of my income will come from poker. So we'll see how it goes.
What do if your parents are still alive, what do they think of all this?
They are still alive, and they are not only supportive, but huge fans and terribly excited about all of this. They just think it's the most amazing and also most hilarious thing ever. So they're my biggest fans. They follow along, whenever I'm playing. They're following all the updates. When I was playing at PCA in January, I was on the TV table for a few days. They were watching all the live streams, and then the funniest thing in the world was so I ended up going deep in the main event, and it came in 40 seconds, so I think I busted second to last day, something like that. And then they tell me a few days later, like, oh, we were so thrilled that Maria Lampropoulos won. And I said, wait, what are you talking about? You kept watching after I busted? And they said, yeah, of course. Then we started rooting for the other Maria after you were out of there. And I said, guys, let me teach you a lesson, a fundamental lesson. When I bust, the tournament's over. It turned out that it was very funny. So they really have gotten into it.
Yeah, it's hard to train parents. They're sometimes just untrainable.
I was, I'm just joking. I was actually thrilled for Maria Lampropoulos. Talk about nice people. She's one of the sweetest people in the world. I'm really glad she's doing really well. So
this book, which is still coming out, has it changed in scope, or has the outline of the book changed numerous times as you've become a very different player poker-wise, or is it still the same book?
No. And there was never a book that it was going to be, because it was always going to be incredibly flexible based on how the journey went. It was always going to follow my journey. And I am, so this might shock some people, but I'm an incredibly disorganized person. And I don't write linearly. I don't do outlines. I've never done that. I've written 2 books before. Have never outlined anything. I write very long articles for magazines. Don't outline those. Don't write them in chronological order. I just kind of, it just kind of happens. I put together different puzzle pieces and rearrange them, and eventually some sort of puzzle will come out, but I'm not actually sure what the full puzzle looks like until all the pieces are in place. And that's always been my process my entire life. And sometimes I've tried to fight against that, because I thought, this is terrible, you're disorganized, you need to kind of get it together, and I've never been able to, and I've kind of had to come to accept that that's just not the way I work. So yes, the book right now is a completely different book than the book I envisioned, and it's probably going to be a completely different book when it's done.
Now, when you have some of these, I'll call them chapters, written in some sequence, presumably some of them could easily be published in the New Yorker or elsewhere before the book comes out. Is that part of the plan, or is that would that surprise you?
That's always part of the plan. So once the book is completely done, in the few months before publication, you'll definitely see excerpts appearing in different places. And yes, the New Yorker would be first on the list because they kind of have the first rights to run an excerpt from it. And yeah, you'll definitely be seeing pieces of it, but that's not going to happen until, the book is basically a few months out.
So you have to start losing first so you can have time to write your book? Is that what you said?
No, I mean, listen, I'm in these few weeks that I'm taking off in New York, I'm spending that time writing and studying poker. So I am writing as I go along. So there will be breaks, between my play. It's not like I play tournaments 365 days out of the year. And I'm someone who's always really worked hard and always worked 7 days a week. So it's not actually a big change for me to be studying poker and basically have 2 full-time jobs, playing poker and then having the book as on the side, because I've actually never gone on book leave before. So my first 2 books I wrote while doing something else. So Mastermind I wrote while I was in grad school, and then The Confidence Game I wrote while I was at the New Yorker, and I didn't go on leave when I did that. So I actually had my weekly column, and I had my longer pieces, and I had to do all of this stuff while working on the book. So in that sense, it's not actually too dissimilar.
Do you see yourself playing poker 5-10 years from now, or do you plan to do? I mean, sometimes it's hard to plan these things, but do you plan to do other books where you immerse yourself in other areas?
No. It's not that I ever wanted to do a book like this. It just so happened that kind of this project came together in this particular way. So do I see myself playing poker in 5 and 10 years? I think that's the $1 million question, quite literally. We'll see how I'm doing. If I'm still enjoying it, if I'm still learning, if I'm still a winning player, then why in the world not? I think it's an absolutely incredible game, and like I said, I've really fallen in love with it. I'm still going to be writing. I can tell you with 100% certainty that I'll be writing in 5 and 10 years, because that's what I will always be doing. Am I suddenly going to become a backgammon player or, do something like that? No, I really don't think that there's going to be another immersive journalism project for me. I think this one is it. And for me, the challenge of a new book is to do something different that you haven't done before. So the next book's going to be something totally different.
Now, some poker players write all the time about why they do things. Gus Hansen's book on why he did every hand is one example that you mentioned earlier. Dan Harrington wrote about that. Mm-hmm. Now, Eric Seidel, he gives very few interviews, and presumably he believes that he has some secrets that if he shares them with other players, then that will give them ammunition to beat him. And so he has higher expected value by keeping his mouth shut. Now, in the scenario of you writing a book using a lot of input from Eric, is he comfortable with this? Because this kind of goes against his practice, although it's once removed, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, because this isn't a strategy book. This is not going to be me saying this is how you play this hand, this is how you play this hand. There are other people to do that. There are people who are better poker players than I'll ever be who do that. And that's not what I'm aiming to do at all. So this is not going to be in the vein of Harrington or Gus Hansen or any of that. That's why I said it at the beginning, it's not really a poker book, even though it's about poker. So I think he's completely comfortable because, there's not going to be a chapter, how do you play high cards on paired boards. You know, that's not actually anything that I'll be talking about. There will be broader lessons, but I think those broader lessons aren't things that give away strategic secrets. They're just things that talk about approaches to the game, mindsets, kind of more broad thematic elements that I don't think give away any secrets.
Now, I haven't read your other books, but they appear to be sort of how to succeed intelligently. Now, is that a fair description?
Sort of, for the first one. So the first one is about Sherlock Holmes and using kind of the Holmesian approach to thought to learn to think better. So that one, absolutely. The second one is about con artists. So it's about, you know, the nature of belief and kind of why we believe stupid things and how con artists are able to persuade us of these alternate realities. And so insofar as you think that kind of being a con artist is how to be successful, then sure. But I think actually you're not wrong in that a lot of the tools that con artists use can be used in more benign or even positive environments to accomplish a lot of good. So if people read it that way, then I think it does give you a lot of ways to be a better communicator, a better listener, someone who's able to persuade people. And as long as you don't do that with conning in mind, that can actually be a way to succeed. So yes, that's a roundabout way of getting to an agreement with you.
Is it so? Reading the book won't teach me how to become a con artist?
It will. Some people have said that I've inadvertently written a handbook for how to be a con artist. That's not what I was going for, but it does definitely take you through the con artist methodology.
Now, I didn't know about this until you and Richard were talking just before we went on the air, that you did a podcast interview kind of about the con artist. What was that all about?
So for my book, I spent 3 years with con artists and had hundreds and hundreds of hours of interviews, and only a fraction of that material ended up going into the book. And so when the book was done, I thought, you know what, I have so many fascinating stories that I do want to tell them. And so I collaborated with Slate Magazine to launch this podcast called The Grift, which is 10 episodes that are all completely scripted by me, and they're all 30 to 40 minutes, and it's one story per episode. Some of them have interviews, others are actually just me kind of reading a script about a historical story. And so they tell the stories of con artists who didn't make it into my book, but who I thought were fascinating characters for one reason or another. And so there are things as diverse as imposters, cult leaders. There's a card shark in there, so for the poker people, that might be an interesting one. Someone who faked his own death, Ponzi schemers, so kind of all over the map in terms of cons.
Yeah, it definitely looks fascinating to me. I'm downloading them.
So how do we get
I hope
them?
You enjoy it. It's called The Grift. You can get them on the Panoply Network. They're on iTunes. And if you search for The Grift podcast, you'll see a lot of different places where you can download them.
There's also a website, thegriftpodcast.com.
Yes, this is correct. And I have a
Wonderful.
link to the feed in my Twitter bio, so you can click on that.
Very good. We're about to let you go. Is there anything that you would like to tell our audience before we do that?
No, the only thing I would say is, I have really enjoyed this journey, and I hope that people who listen and who watch the journey from the sidelines will realize that, poker is an incredibly deep and fascinating game, and one that can really help you grow as a thinker and as an individual, even outside the poker tables. So I'm a firm believer in the power of poker to make the world a better place in a lot of ways. And I'm hoping that kind of with my story, with the book, I will have a lot of other people who embrace that message.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
One other thing they should learn. They should learn is that when you bust out of the main event this year, the main event is over. Is that what you wanted to?
Yes. When I'm out of the main is over. But let's hope that they watch the entire main event.
So in that case, you're going to be at least at the final table. So with all that millions of dollars you're going to win from that, are you going to enter the one-drop tournament that starts then a few days later?
Oh my God, absolutely not. That would be the most stupid thing that I could possibly do with my bankroll. Talk about playing outside your league. No, honestly, if by some miracle I were to ever, win an event like the main event where you actually win millions of dollars, there is no way in hell I would ever start playing those high buy-in tournaments. I know exactly where my level of competence is, and even a 25K is too much for me. I played my first 25K in Monte Carlo, and I did it because I'm going to be playing in the PSPC, the Poker Stars Players Championship in January, because I won the Platinum Pass when I won the PCA National. And so I decided that it was going to be really good for me to start playing a few events at that level just to become comfortable and to make the most of that opportunity to play in January. But going into it, I knew that this was a learning opportunity and somewhere where I was going to be really out of my league, and I was absolutely right. So I think you need to know what your level of competence is and not become overconfident just because you happen to win a few big tournaments.
Yeah, actually, it seems to me a huge advantage that you have was part of your study was about how your emotional states affect decision-making, right? So
yes, that's what my dissertation was about, yep.
So it just seems like you're ideally suited for poker. I mean, assuming that you learned something through writing that dissertation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for sure. It definitely gave me a lot of insight into the ways that our minds go wrong when we end up in those types of situations, in hot decision-making situations where we are emotional. And so I'm definitely hyper aware of that.
Very good. Thank you again. It was a pleasure having you on the air. We wish you the best in the World Series of Poker this year.
Thank you both so much. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
So thank you, Maria. Thank you, Richard. Go out and hit lots of royal flushes, everybody.